To follow the development of events, let's remember how it all began. Hanford, in the morning, Alexandra Shaw called the police station on duty, choking on her sobs. The woman said that unknown people broke into the house. Her husband was beaten. She was tortured. They took out of the house everything of value, and the owners were rolled up in a blanket and set on fire. They did not wait until they burned alive. She managed to free herself. An investigation team went to the scene. Detectives, listening to the stories of the victims, could not help but recognize there were too many oddities in this robbery. Derek and Alexandra Shaw, no strangers to the city. Derek was what is called a unique specialist in adventure, and his services brought him huge profits. On the one hand, the motive for the robbery seemed clear, but the brutality with which the criminals acted shocked even the most seasoned detectives. At night, skillfully opening the lock, the raiders broke into the house. The first victim was Alexandra. She was smothered with a pillow until unconscious, and then the turn came to Derek, who was beaten until he did not indicate the place where the money was stored. However, that wasn't enough for the raiders. They methodically continued beating him until Derek lost consciousness again, and then Alexandra showed them a secret cellar. There they were, waiting for a real jackpot: securities, gold bars, antique trinkets. The booty was so big that they could only take it out in Derek's car. However, their plan did not end there. First, they decided to get rid of the witnesses and then the evidence. The next day, Derek's car was found completely burnt out in a junkyard. The long hours of interviews didn't go to waste. The detectives got enough detailed descriptions of the attackers from the victims to put together clear sketches. And like a jigsaw puzzle, an important detail suddenly popped out of Alexandra's memory. She'd heard one of the assailants referred to as Dex. It would seem that here it was, a clue. Detectives, putting everything else aside, went into the study of the card catalog of previous convictions, checking hundreds of names of robbers and killers. But there was no Dex among them. It appeared that either the burglar had no prior record, or Dex wasn't his real name. And this lead, seemingly so promising, eventually led to another dead end. Nothing could be gleaned through unclassified informants either, and the detectives speculated that the Shaw family might be behind the raid on the Shaw family. In that case, they would have to have a local tipster. From experience, the police knew that often the role of a tipster is played by someone from the victim's entourage. A thorough check of all acquaintances, friends, and relatives of Derek and Alexandra began. However, it soon became clear that this version was wrong as well. Restaurateur Cassius Morgan returned from the office late at night, his legs buzzing with fatigue. After closing the door behind him, Morgan went into the room, sat down in a chair, closed his eyes, and immediately dozed off. He woke with horror. Someone was strangling him, and as it turned out, not in a dream, but in reality. Seeing three strangers in front of him, he tried to scream, but the one who stood behind him tightened the rope around his neck. As Morgan's nightmare grew more terrifying by the minute, Cassius was discovered by a neighbor in the morning, bound and torn. She called an ambulance and reported the incident to the police. Recovering, the victim said that the bandits tortured him with a hot iron, demanding all his savings and valuables. In addition to money and jewelry, the raiders took out everything they liked. The detectives made a detailed list of the stolen goods, and when Morgan described the raiders, it became clear that his house was visited by the same gang that attacked the family Shaw, Derek, and Alexandra. Young, violent, one of the attackers Morgan said seemed to have a scorpion tattoo on his neck. This detail became invaluable to the detectives. Just a few days later, it led the cops to one of the gang members. When Adam returned from school, he followed the instructions he received from his mother as usual, locked the front door, washed his hands, changed his clothes, and warmed up lunch. He had already sat down at the table and picked up his spoon when the doorbell rang. Adam remembered strangers were not allowed to open, so he tiptoed out into the hallway and carefully looked out the window. There was a pretty young girl standing outside. Soon, she rang again. "Who's there?" asked the boy. "Adam, open up. I'm from my mom. She asked me to give you something," replied the stranger. The schoolboy opened the door. The boy was thrown into the bathroom and locked in there, and everything of value was taken out of the house. Same gang again. Detectives didn't just recognize it from the robber's MO. They found a witness who completely confirmed their assumptions. A neighbor girl said that 3 days ago near the house sat some guy smoking and watching. On his neck, he had a huge tattoo in the form of a scorpion. The girl's testimony was compared to Morgan's and Shaw's. Finally convinced, They were describing the same person. Detectives began to search for a criminal with a special note. All the files on convicts were raised. There were 3 criminals matching the description. All about the same age, 25 to 27 years old, similar build, all with large tattoos on their necks. But then came a message from an informant. According to him, the one the detectives were looking for was Leo Cole. He was released just a couple months ago. He was immediately detained. Once at the station, Cole realized there was no point in denying it. But even before he gave the names of all the gang members, the police managed to apprehend another raider. And here, they got a big surprise. Among the stolen items stolen by the raiders were many notable items. Detectives and their agents had been tracking all the buybacks of stolen goods, but for a long time, these measures had not yielded any results. And suddenly, the unbelievable happened. That evening, Commissioner Blake Harris, who personally followed the investigation, left work late. The day was nervous. To calm down and relieve the tension, he decided to walk around the city. But there was no way to relax. He couldn't stop thinking about the case and the criminals he couldn't figure out. Harris realized that the detained Leo was only a small scum, but who led the raiders, and most importantly, where the looted items could disappear without a trace. Absorbed in thought, he did not notice how almost reached the house, and suddenly his attention was attracted by a familiar car parked by the road. It was a Riker Blackwell car, with his son Mika sitting behind the wheel. Poor father, the policeman thought. He turned off the road, walked up to the car, and looked out the window. Harris knew Mika was using drugs, but the car had the entire front seat crammed with items from Derek and Alexander Shaw's house. The police officer knew the description of these things as well as his own birthday. There was no doubt Mika transported the loot, so it is related to the gang. The chief personally brought the suspect to the police station. For many, the appearance of such a figure in the case was a complete surprise. A guy from a well-to-do family, it would seem, what he lacked. But detectives with experience knew it can be worse. Interrogating Mika, the police realized he is a man weak, driven. Himself would never go to the crime. He got into the gang because of his addiction to drugs. Mika was terrified and immediately made it clear that he would tell everything he knew. He gave the name of his remaining free accomplice. Hardest of all was to disarm the gang leader. It was his gangsters called Dex. He was the organizer of the criminal group and its leader. It was he, according to the testimony of the victims, was the most brutal among the bandits. This man was the same handsome young man from a good family who was seen in company with baseball player Kane Kamen shortly before his murder. Daring and cruel leader of the gang of raiders was the son of one of the richest men in the city of Hanford, California, Dexter Drake. But none of the gang members testified against him. They were afraid.